So it's good to be with you again. Last time I spoke about the genital dimension of our sexuality, because this series has the topic being a chaste man. And we talked about how the genital dimension can be quite explosive and how to bring it into some level of control by the grace of God. That's what we mean by chastity. But we need to look at the second dimension of our sexuality, which is the affective dimension. That's like the dimension, the emotional attractions that we experience and the emotional relationships that we enter into. This is a stronger and more relational dimension of our sexual powers. See, we need to love and to be loved. We have a need to be emotionally connected. And so our sexuality is written into us, as it were, for that purpose, to help us to enter more deeply into relationship with others in a way that is according to God's plan for us as human beings. So there are some inadequate ways that we try to seek this type of connection. Sometimes we can just have a fear of being connected with others, afraid of meaningful relationships. That's not unusual amongst young men, actually. I've noticed that a man can fill up his life with many activities, with work and with sport and study and many things that sort of keep him going, but it sometimes can be almost like an escape from the deeper work of relationship. He sort of escapes from that a bit, So I don't sort of mean by relationships so much having a girlfriend, although of course that's a good thing, but just relationships in general. Because all of that, as I said last time, it's part of our sexuality in the general sense, that as sexual beings, we'll be much more integrated if we have good relationships with people, generally speaking. Because if we deny this dimension of our sexuality, we'll usually end up having trouble at the genital area. We'll end up having these sort of demanding urges within us more strongly, because our sexuality, as I said, is a relational power. And so if we're not sort of having some level of intimacy in our lives that's appropriate to our state of life, then that can actually work against us. It seems that way. So if we ignore this need for intimacy, then the more instinctual part of our makeup pushes itself and rises to the surface strongly and with greater force. So that's what I oftentimes say to guys who are sort of indulging in masturbation a lot. I say, look, get into some good, healthy relationships. Start taking the focus off yourself, and don't allow yourself to become so self-centered in your makeup that it just heightens this drive within you for satisfaction. So, if we're not meeting then this need for relationships, then it does lead to a heightened urgency inside you of your basic drives for genital sex. So you're more likely to be drawn to pornography because of that, and to masturbation as a result. They're very inadequate outlets for what your sexuality is given to you for, but we go that way sometimes because we're looking for the satisfaction that, and it's a warped way. It's an inadequate way of an outlet for your sexual, your whole sexual dimension. So pornography and masturbation are self-centered, of course, and they're narcissistic. It's all about me. It's seductive, of course, because it's easy, it's accessible, it releases tension, you can explore, as it were, feelings and fantasies in the privacy of your room. but it's an escape from interpersonal vulnerability. It's not real. It's a safe, secret fantasy world. No risk of rejection that you might have in a relationship. No risk of embarrassment that you'd have in a relationship. And no risk of failure too that you might have in a real relationship. So, a man who gives himself this sort of thing can, as it were, explore in a fake way sexual intimacy without leaving your room. But it's really like an intimacy with yourself, which is a bit dumb, and it's having an affair with yourself. So part of weaning off this bad habit then of masturbation and pornography and the compulsions that it develops is actually to develop good relationships with other people. Enter into more healthy relationships with both men and women, into friendships that will meet something of this need for intimacy that cries so deeply within us. It's built into us by God. It's part of our makeup. And we can't deny it and don't go looking for these sort of false ways of trying to fulfill it. So another problematic way in which this affective dimension can arise in our lives is what I guess most young men will experience, and I did certainly as a young man too, an infatuation with a woman, where you sort of have a crush on somebody. And you may not even talk to her, You may not even sort of have any communication. So it's a bit unreal, but it's there all the same, and you worship the ground she walks on, as it were. And that, of course, is an imaginary balloon that needs to be burst by reality. and it also is an indication, too, that as yet you're still struggling to enter into mature relationships with people. That's puppy love that is usually part of the general maturing way that we have, or pathway or journey that we have to take as men to come to that place where we can enter into mature relationships. So not to get too hard on yourself about it, but just to realize what it is and let the balloon be burst. So it's a fairly common thing. So we're talking here about intimacy, as we said that our sexuality is geared towards intimate relationship. And so we need to find levels of intimacy with both men and women that are appropriate for our state of life, right? Our sexuality really blossoms in the context of relationships where there's a genuine love developing of one kind or another. So we need relationships with other men, we need relationships with women, we need relationships with families, or we need relationships within our own family, in which we really feel free to be who we are, sharing about who I am, and sharing about what's really important to me. Not just chat, but what's really important to me, what makes me up, is what makes me tick, And it involves allowing other persons to be the other person in the relationship, to be who he or she is, and not seeking to manipulate or to dominate or to change them. It's based on mutual acceptance. So if you have that sort of level of intimacy with people, it's just some people, it makes such a difference to how you experience yourself as a sexual man. We need these relations. They don't need to be physically sexualized. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about, good relationship of intimacy. They help us to give love and to receive love, because you need that. Everyone, and especially as you go into your 20s and your 30s, you'll have a deep need for intimacy. And if your intimacy needs are not being met by good, healthy relationships, then you'll maybe start to seek to fulfill them in very inadequate and useless ways, such as pornography or masturbation. But given the current culture and the society in which we live, it's usually best that these relationships be based in people who share faith with you, who share the same values that you have. So we might call them brothers and sisters in the Lord, if you like. That's really good if you can have that, because you have common values and common expectations in regard to what makes up being sexual. So you need friendships that have good boundaries, but are mutually enriching friendships. Respectful and freeing for both parties. Because as I said, like, sexuality is this relational power, and it will be integrated into our person most positively through upbuilding and affirming relationships with both brothers and sisters in the Lord. And so in relationship with brothers, we find ourselves affirmed in our manhood. I remember coming into, as a young man, a good brotherhood of guys, and it really strengthened me in my manhood and who I am as a man. It's funny, we think somehow that I'll get strengthened in my manhood by having a relationship with a woman. Well, there's a certain aspect in which that happens, but actually the bigger thing you need is brothers in the Lord who affirm you in who you are as a man. And especially it's good to have older men. You can gain a lot from older men, especially if you've been wounded in your relationship with your father. Many guys have a wounding there where the father was quite inadequate, and the father-son relationship was deficient or maybe not existent at all, hardly. And so having older men around who can be like a father figure is really great as well. And of course, if you have a history of broken sexual relationships with women, then it's great to be able to have sisters in the Lord who you can relate to without an agenda, right? And that can really help you grow as a man and in your sexual identity, as it were, without having to get the complication of romance. Right? That can really help to have brothers and sisters like that. To have a sister like that in particular. And so no romantic expectation, no pressure to impress or anything like that. It can be very big healing from any wounding that's happened in your sexuality. So now I just want to briefly talk about the third dimension. That's like the affective dimension and the importance of having healthy relationships. And the third dimension of our sexuality is the more personal and spiritual dimension. This is very important to remember because this is what most people don't think about. They know that somehow the sexuality has very physical drives about it, and they know also that it sort of has emotional intimacy, but they don't realize the more spiritual dimension, that we are embodied spirits. Like our sexuality is not only about our bodies, but it's also about us as spiritual persons. We have a soul. So the two main faculties of the soul are the mind, the intellect that's geared towards truth, and the will that's geared towards love. So you are made for truth, and you're made for love. And so our bodily sexuality is only really human if it's governed by the mind and the will. That is, if it's consistent with truth and with love. You see, the genital and the affective dimensions of our sexuality are the raw material, really, that are meant to sort of be used in the sexual act. But the sexual act will not be genuine unless it's actually governed by truth and love. The sexual act speaks of truth if you're true to yourself, you're true to the other, and you're true to God. And so often it's a lie because a sexual act that's not saying to the other person, I'm for you forever and I'm committed to you forever, then it's speaking a lie. And so it needs to be truth that governs our sexual acts. And the sexual act speaks of love too. If there's a mutual self-giving permanent union of the couple in marriage, then it's speaking of love. But it's not speaking of love when it's in the back of a car or something, rather in a moment of passion to just get what you want. That's not speaking of love. That's speaking of lust for what you want. So sexual acts are not just biological acts. they involve the inmost being of the human person. Right? The sexual intercourse is an integral part of love, by which a man and a woman commit themselves totally to one another unto death. And so if it's not in the context of marriage, then it's not really true. You're not being true to yourself, you're not being true to the other person, you're not being true to God. And neither is it really genuine in the act of love, because it's not a self-giving where I'm saying I'm with you forever, I'm committed to you forever, which is the meaning of our sexual acts. It's meant to be like that in mutual love. So people will sort of say, I'm having safe sex because I've got a condom, huh? But honestly, any sexual act outside of marriage is not safe sex. It's actually dangerous sex. It destroys the dignity of both people involved, and it wounds the human spirit. You see, we have to understand that our sexuality is not just some physical thing that you do like animals. Huh? When we engage in sexual activity, in sexual intercourse, then that's a giving of oneself to the other. And it's a uniting in one flesh that can only be authentically done in marriage. And so all of our sexual acts need to be governed by those principles of the truth and love. Is it a lie? Yes, it is a lie if it's not really, truly in the context of a permanent union of love in marriage between man and woman. Is it an act of love? Well, no, it's not an act of love unless it's in that permanent union, because it's not saying I'm with you forever. That's what it's designed for. So it's very important then to understand this spiritual dimension, that we as human beings have this great beautiful gift of our sexuality, which has that genital dimension, which is so beautiful and exciting and brings to climax in a very joyful and powerful way of pleasure that's so beautiful in marriage. And it has this emotional dimension, which is of course the intimacy of man and woman in sexual union, which can a level of intimacy that's the most beautiful level of intimacy that can be found in this earth, apart from intimacy with God. And then of course it's an act of truth and love, where the mind and the will can't be disengaged. You know, if you allow your physical drives to take over you, then you've given away your mind, and you've given away your will. You've become governed by forces that are negative and destructive. You become a slave to your passions, and that's not a human thing to do. The only way to be truly human in your sexual activity is to be engaged in sexual intercourse with your wife, and that's the only way, my dear brothers. And so just to really aspire towards that and prepare yourself well for that by now entering into that self-control that you need to have. And sure, it's great to have intimacy with men and women at this time in your journey, but any way in which you sort of seek to act out in sexual activity is going to be damaging to you, and it's going to be damaging to others, the other person, and not to allow that to happen. Prepare yourself, keep yourself safe, keep yourself protected, keep yourself ready for the moment. You know, be prepared to wait. True love waits. True love waits. And bless the Lord.